The Space Force? Like, what is that? So recently, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, has announced that he would like to have a Space Force as the sixth branch of the military, and he wants that to be done in a totally separate thing than any other branch. And because of that, a lot of you guys have been sending me DMs and everything, being like, hey man, will you make a video on your thoughts, your opinions on the Space Force and everything? And I don't generally do, things like this, like reactions to this or my opinion on this current event thing, but I thought this was kind of interesting. And I haven't really seen anybody talk about, I guess, the way I'm going to present this information to you guys. And, so I'm going to basically lay it out as like, which way am I leaning? Am I for it? Am I against it? And then some pros and cons and everything. So first off, I think for the most part, I think most people are against this, in my opinion. I think they're just looking at this like, why? Like, we don't need this right now. And there's, apparently a bunch of, higher ups, generals and stuff in the military. And they're like, no, Donald Trump, like, we don't need this right now. And just so you guys know, like, Donald Trump, he can't just, do an executive order or whatever and just have this be like, it's still going to have to go through due process, go through the House and the Senate and everything and get officially approved for it to be a thing. But it's still interesting to think about, because I guess Trump is, and I think, the first person to actually mention a specific dedicated Space Force to, space, because right now the Air Force is that's kind of under their umbrella. But mentioning it for the first time right now kind of just makes you wonder, like, at some point, like, is this actually going to be a thing, or is this just, something that he's thinking of and he's like, I'm just going to say it, stir up whatever, and then hopefully we'll get something done. Now, before I get into my whole reasonings and explanations and everything, I just want you guys to know that I'm in no way, shape, or form, like, obviously a professional in this. I have my limited knowledge. At the time of recording, this is all the information that I know, so if anything crazy happens in the news over the next couple of days before I post this, then that's just going to be something that I'm going to have to deal with. But I'm not an expert or anything. This is honestly just my personal opinion. Now, what's the reasoning behind this? Like, why in the world would Donald Trump, like, even just think of this? Like, it just sounds kind of crazy to call something the Space Force. Like, it sounds really futuristic, right? But the Air Force, like I mentioned before, they are the ones kind of in control of that. And what is the Space Force? So, the United States and all these other countries, we have satellites up in space. So one of the things that, we might have to deal with in the future at some point is basically if there's like a World War III or something that goes on and another country wants to attack our satellites, right? So they attack our satellites. If you take out our satellites, then, all the communication and stuff on the ground is just done. Like, you can't communicate. If you can't communicate, it's going to be really hectic and it's going to be really difficult to fight in wars. Like, you're not going to be able to fly UAVs, all your GPSs and everything is just going to be all screwed up. So, defending space is actually really important. Like, we need to find a way to defend that. And that's kind of what the Air Force's job is right now. Like, they are the Air Force, and previously, I thought kind of space, encompassed the Air Force, because there's not really a barrier between, the, I guess, atmosphere to space. I don't know, technically there might be, but, it's pretty much the same thing. And I think that when most people hear Space Force, they think of Star Wars, they think of Star Trek and all stuff, and literal, spaceships just flying around in space, going to the moon and like literally having like a Star Wars kind of thing. And I don't think that's what they're really thinking about here. They're looking at, Russia, they're looking at China and their little space programs and everything. And then we're looking at, our satellites, and that's kind of what I think, from my understanding, this is all kind of centered around is, launching attacks in space rather than flying spaceships in space. Like, that's kind of way out there in the future. And that's actually important. But my real kind of negative thing with this, and that's also kind of a complaint of other generals and stuff in the military, is that why don't, instead of having the Space Force, why doesn't he just kind of incorporate that into the Air Force and kind of build that to be more robust, rather than kind of creating a separate Space Force? And what is going to happen, like, if theoretically this were to actually happen, then what we would do is we would take people from the Air Force who have specialties in that area and they're working in that area, and they would actually transition over to the Space Force. And then by doing that, you're technically making the Air Force weaker, and then you're starting up this whole new Space Force thing. So you're kind of making both things weaker at the same time, rather than just, in my opinion, just building that up in the Air Force. So like right now, the cyber branch in the Army is a new branch. Previously, there was cyber stuff going on in the Air Force, and in the past couple of years, in 2016, cyber became an official branch in the Army. And cyberspace is kind of a thing, you know, there's no land, there's no air, there's no sea or anything. Cyberspace is a whole new frontier, just like I guess they're talking about space. And my thing is like, you know, if we just created another branch in the Army for cyberspace, why don't we just do that for the Air Force and call it some kind of space thing? I don't know, space division or whatever. So in my opinion, that would be better. Don't know why we should split up everything. And also, I think that it would be extremely way more expensive to create an entirely new branch rather than just creating a smaller branch inside of the Air Force. So if we were to do that and kind of make it a part of the Air Force, then you could keep the structure of the Air Force and you wouldn't have to develop something totally new and have a totally new command structure in the Space Force. You could just incorporate that in the Air Force, and I think the transition will be a lot easier. It kind of amazes me of why either, you know, obviously, you know, somebody's not going to make the best decisions all the time, but it just makes more sense in my opinion to make that a part of the Air Force and or just build that out, because space stuff, if you guys didn't know, is extremely expensive. Like, it's a lot more expensive to build a satellite or a spaceship or anything really to go in space than it is to buy a whole bunch of weapons, you know, for the Army or whatever, or some Humvees, or really even some jets. You know, if you buy a jet for, you know, tens of millions of dollars, right? It's like $20 million for some kind of jet. And then you want to build a spaceship to launch something into space. Like, that's way more expensive. And then if you tack on top of that the price of building out an entirely new branch, like, that's just ridiculous in my opinion. Now, what are some of the positives to actually having a Space Force, something to really concentrate on this? The biggest thing that I can think of, honestly, is just innovation, right? So whenever you think of innovation that has happened in the past, a lot of it has to do with, number one, the military, and then number two, space, right? So, you know, we're trying to build things out, you know, whenever wars and stuff are going on, that's a lot of times whenever you see innovation. And whenever we're trying to, you know, get to freaking the moon or whatever, there's a lot of innovation going on. You know, they say cell phones, Wi-Fi, the internet itself was all basically because of the military. And so creating a Space Force or a space division in the Air Force, in my opinion, I think it might push a little bit of innovation. Obviously, that's not going to be something you're going to see, you know, overnight. You might not even see the effects of that for, you know, 10 to 20 years because technology just takes that long whenever it goes from the military to get improved and then kind of transition to the civilian market. So that's just something, in my opinion, that's a positive that could come from this, is innovation. And then the second thing is just the conversation about the Space Force could kind of put us ahead of the curve, because it's something that's important, but it's not something that, at least I see, that's kind of like on the edge, like right now, that should be like the most important thing right now. So, you know, having it a conversation right now, whether it's going to get denied or whatever, but just having it in the conversation might put a little bit more emphasis on, you know, hey, we need to protect our satellites, we need to protect the space area, rather than just, you know, a couple thousand feet up. We need to go like, you know, a couple miles up, protect the satellites, we need to protect all this stuff, we need to protect space in general. So the conversation around that, I think, is a good thing. It's just the amount of resources and assets that would be dedicated to a dedicated branch, I think, is a little bit above and beyond what we need right now. What I think Donald Trump is insinuating right now with the Space Force, I think most people are thinking that this is kind of like a 50 to 100 year down the line thing that we should be talking about. You know, in 50 years, we could have a dedicated Space Force. But like right now, I don't think that it's really as big of a deal to have a dedicated branch rather than a piece of the Air Force. So that is it. That is my opinion on the Space Force and what I think about it, pros, cons, whatever, some of the positives that could come from it. So let me know down in the comment section, like, what you guys think. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? Do you agree with some of the things I said, or do you disagree with some of the things that I said? I am actually very curious to see what you guys have to say. So leave a comment down below, and if you guys have not already, hit that like button. That would be awesome. If you want to check out some more videos, hit the subscribe button. That would be even better. If you guys are not following me on Instagram and Snapchat, social media links are right here. If you haven't hit the notification bell button, you should do that like right now. Hope you have an amazing day, and I will see you later.